Welcome, everybody, to our first ever Body Signals Live. I'm your host, Bill Tancer, the Chief Data Scientist here at Signos, and I'm joined by my podcast co-host, the Head of Nutrition, and a walking encyclopedia of dietetic knowledge, Alyssa Wilson, registered dietitian. Alyssa, welcome to our first Body Signals Live.
Thank you. This is so exciting.
It is exciting. This is the first time we've done this, and we're so excited to present to you our Signos Nutrition Method. And in this format, what we're going to do, if we go to the next slide, we're going to cover what I think is the foundation of this entire method, which is our plate method, the Signos plate method. Alyssa's actually going to present it. And we're going to take 10 to 15 minutes to do that and then take some of your questions. If you have any questions during the webinar, and hopefully you do, just go down to the Q&A button that is there in your Zoom app at the very bottom of the screen. Click on it, enter a question. We'll be fielding as many questions as we can during that last 15 minutes. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alyssa, and we're going to start this presentation about the plate method.
Thanks, Bill. I love that we are opening up the Body Signals Live with the plate method. And before we even get into that, I want to begin with some of our overarching nutrition guidelines. So here at Signos, you will not find us recommending one specific diet to everyone, because nutrition and health is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it is very, very personalized. So whether you are currently eating a keto diet, a vegan diet, a paleo diet, a low glycemic or Mediterranean diet, they can all be optimized using your individual glucose data. So one thing that we do recommend with all these different types of eating patterns is to choose primarily nutrient-dense whole foods that are minimally processed and limit highly refined, processed, and ultra-processed foods that are full of empty calories and devoid of nutrients. So that is one of the most important things to really focus on, is eating real foods. From there, we want to build a glucose-friendly plate. And that is really, like Bill mentioned, the core of our nutrition philosophy. This glucose-friendly plate method is designed to help you balance your meals. We want to include 1/4 of your plate protein, half of your plate non-starchy vegetables, 1/4 of your plate carbohydrates, and 1 to 2 tablespoons or servings of healthy fats. This method, and by eating this way and setting up your plate this way, it provides nutrients. It increases our satiety, so we are full after our meals. And it also helps stabilize our blood sugar. And it's really, really simple and easy to follow just by setting up the plate. And this really guarantees that your plate is balanced and you're including all 3 macronutrients: proteins, fats, and carbs. And we're going to dive into this in the next few slides too.
So a couple of questions for you, Alyssa. Do you suggest this plate method for all the meals, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
I do. I know breakfast is a little difficult to get vegetables in. So, I think it's fun to be creative, whether it's making a smoothie and throwing in, frozen rice cauliflower or a handful of spinach, or making an egg scramble with a ton of vegetables in. I always think, getting those veggies in or getting those fruits in can help really balance your plate, along with enough protein and healthy fats. So maybe throw some butter in that smoothie, or avocado in those eggs.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're doing this as the first webinar. I've seen a lot of Signos members, as soon as they get their first sensor, they're like, okay, I place my sensor, now what? And giving everybody this foundation. I use this foundation myself in my own diet. Starting with his meals, as you said, if you start here, you're starting from a great place. You're building that foundation of having good nutrition and also some satiety that should eliminate any need for snacking during the day, that's where a lot of us, including myself, that's where I used to spike in the past, is that snacking in between meals. If you can do this, I think you're at least halfway there, maybe even more.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point. You can take note of the meal that you ate. How does it compare to this plate method? If you're hungry right after, check in. Maybe you didn't have enough fiber. Maybe there wasn't enough protein or healthy fats. Maybe it was more processed food and you saw a blood sugar spike and then it dropped and you're hungry right after. So using this plate method as a guide really helps build those balanced meals with the goal of, having breakfast. It's filling, it keeps you full until lunch, and so on. So you're not grabbing food and needing to rely on snacks throughout the entire day. The next thing, speaking of your glucose and maybe it's spiking and dropping, is we want to observe our glucose after we eat our meal. And so there are a few points and a few metrics that we want to really take note of. So the first is glucose variability, which is represented as a percentage. It refers to the frequency and height of your spikes and dips throughout the day. And we are looking for a glucose variability, or what we call GV, to be less than 15% per day for weight loss. Now, this number will be provided for you in the Signos app, front and center in the hexagon. The next metric we're looking at is the change in glucose after your meal to see how your glucose responded to that specific meal. Now, the data shows that in non-diabetic and in diabetic individuals, that the higher post-meal glucose levels have an increased risk of these chronic diseases. So it's putting you at an increased risk. We really want to make sure that we are avoiding these large spikes and drops throughout the day and looking for more of these like rounded hills when it comes to our glucose response. So we recommend aiming for a rise of, less than 30 milligrams per deciliter. And you can also see that in the Signos app. You can actually, we will show you your exact increase and your exact response to each meal that is logged. And then finally, we're looking at our time and range for the day. And this represents the amount of time that you've spent within your personalized glucose range. So it's going to be different for each person. And we're looking to stay around 85% or greater. So let's dive into these 3 macronutrients. The first that we're going to talk about is protein. Now, protein is really important because it helps to keep our blood sugar stable. It helps stimulate our metabolism. It sends a strong message to our brain, letting us know that we are full. It helps support exercise performance and building muscle mass. And it helps us with weight loss because we actually burn more calories digesting protein than the other macronutrients. Now, when we think about the plate method and using this as a visual, you want to focus on filling a fourth of your plate with protein. Another thing that I want to talk about when it comes to portion control is using your hand as a guide. This will allow you to be really mindful of of your portion sizes for each macronutrient, and it is with you wherever you are. So when it comes to protein, we recommend at least 1 to 2 palmfuls at each meal with a goal of around 30 grams of protein at each meal.
This is one of my most challenging of the plate method, just because I married a vegan, which kind of made me a vegan, and finding protein sources have been tough. So any suggestions for people that have some meal restrictions, maybe somebody's pescatarian or vegetarian or vegan, to help ramp up that protein amount?
Yeah, and this is, such a great question because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so you're finding what works best for you and your lifestyle and your preferences and your choices. So we typically recommend a variety of protein sources. If you're a vegan, there are great soy protein sources like tofu, tempeh, miso. They have great vegetarian or vegan protein powder options out there. We do want to stay away from like more of the processed, fake meat ingredients that can be super processed, and stay with like more of the, true soy proteins. But if you're pescatarian, you can enjoy, all different types of seafood and fish. And if you eat animal sources, try and get a variety of chicken, beef, turkey, pork. And depending too, if you do dairy, cottage cheese and Greek yogurt are both, really good sources of protein as well. I always recommend just choosing a plain version instead of choosing one that may have sneaky added sugars in there.
Yeah, they sneak a lot of sugars in a lot of those yogurts, especially ones with the fruit. Another quick question though, this plate method, does it apply to no matter what your mission is? So if I'm in a weight loss mission versus I've lost the weight, I'm in weight maintenance, should I still stick to these percentages?
Yeah, it's so I would say depending on your goal and depending kind of where you are on that metabolic health spectrum, the serving sizes may look a little different. So let's say if you're looking to build more muscle mass, maybe the protein is increased, maybe the carbohydrates are increased, versus where maybe you're more insulin resistant, where maybe we need to focus more on those non-starchy vegetables. So I would say that this is a really great baseline on how to fill your plate. And then a few things may change. Again, like increasing calories, we may add another serving of healthy fats. If you're trying to gain weight or gain muscle. So it really just depends, but this is a great baseline. And then you want to see how your glucose responds. And then kind of go from there. So it's all about experimentation, which I know we're going to talk about and on a later Body Signals Live podcast. But yes, this is a great baseline. And then experimenting and seeing where your portion sizes are and what you need to add a little bit more of or a little bit less of.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go to the next macronutrient, which are healthy fats. So fats are so important. A lot of times we can be very, very scared of fats. I know that we're kind of getting away from that, thank goodness, that low fat era, but fats help stabilize our blood sugar. They actually slow down the digestion of carbohydrates and protein, and they provide the raw materials for hormone production. They're necessary for the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. They promote a healthy brain. They help reduce inflammation. And what I think is really important is they provide flavor to our meals. So we like to recommend to include 1 to 2 servings per meal, with the serving being, about a tablespoon or the size of your thumb. This could be, a tablespoon of, almond butter or peanut butter, olive oil or avocado oil, maybe a handful of nuts and seeds, an ounce of cheese, or about a fourth of avocado. So making sure that we are kind of including those healthy fats at our meals. That's very important.
Yeah, the fat thing is so interesting. I think it's somewhat generational that I don't know, Alyssa, if you've seen the Seinfeld episode about the low fat or no fat yogurt, but I think that kind of encapsulates what a lot of people in my generation think about fat. And we're kind of trained back in the 90s to just avoid fat completely.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not really the right way to go, that there actually is, as you mentioned, some nutritional benefit to getting these healthy fats.
Absolutely. And, when it comes to the food industry, unfortunately, when you are in these products are low fat, they have to, improve the taste. So they're adding a lot of sugar. So I always recommend, flipping it over, reading the back of the label and seeing if there are sources of added sugars in there. But the fats are really going to help keep you full. And it's not, you don't need a ton of them, but we just want to make sure that we are incorporating them because they are really important to our health.
Yeah, you said something very important there, which is that flipping the package over. This is something
Yeah.
you mentioned on Body Signals, which I thought was one of the most important things that we've discussed, which is ignore all those fancy pictures, the
Ignore
drawing
it.
of the barn,
The
the
green
green
barn in the
coloring.
fields. Yeah.
Go straight to the nutrition label and look to
Yes.
see what ingredients are there and what's the breakdown of things like healthy fats and added sugars that you want to curtail to the best you can and get those good sources of all these macronutrients.
Yeah. And what we really want to limit are those hydrogenated fats, or sometimes you'll see them called partially hydrogenated fats that have higher levels of trans fats. These are going to be found in more of like the processed vegetable oils, the frozen meals, fried foods, packaged foods. And then also limiting, excess saturated fats, especially if they're eaten with refined carbohydrates. Those negatively impact our health. So really focusing on the real whole food fats, the real sources of fats that can, again, add delicious flavor to our meals. And finally, let's talk about carbohydrates. This is, really everyone's favorite topic. Like, do I go low carb? Do I go high carb? So let's dive into this. Carbohydrates are our main source of energy for our body, for our brain. They're filled with vitamins and minerals and fiber that are important for our health, and they help support a healthy gut microbiome. They can help our thyroid functioning and our exercise performance, and they can even support our adrenal glands, which helps us calm down to our stress response. Now, where our carbs should come from and how we want to fill up our plate is that they should be majority of our plate. We recommend half of our plate, or 1 to 2 closed fistfuls of colorful, non-starchy vegetables. And you may have heard it before, but we want to eat the rainbow. So including a variety in all the colors of the rainbow, because they are going to provide different nutrients. Then we recommend about 1/4 of our plate, or a cupped hand, of starchy vegetables, whole grains, and fruits. So this can include, beans and peas, rice and corn, and really all fruits. Now, I want to reinforce that carbs are not something that we want to be, completely avoid or cut out, but, enjoying a lot of non-starchy, colorful vegetables, and really experimenting and finding your personal carb tolerance. And this can be really helpful when you're using Signos and looking at your glucose responses in real time to the meals that you've had. And,
I'm so glad you're saying this because I know so many members. I see it on our Facebook group where members just get their first sensor, they put it on, and they just avoid all carbs. And that is a way to flatten your glucose, but you're missing out on, as you mentioned, that main source of energy for our body. So you do so at a price.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. I've seen that too. And even when I started, I was like, oh my gosh, I want a completely flat line. But you can have a completely flat glucose line just from drinking olive oil all day. So we want to make sure that we are eating a nutrient-dense diet that is going to support our optimal health and support our longevity and our health span. So, use Signos and find your personal carb tolerance and what works best for you. Maybe you are more insulin sensitive and you can tolerate a lot more carbs, or maybe you're pre-diabetic and diabetic and you have to start with a smaller serving size, maybe earlier in the day or around the time that you're moving a lot more. So we always recommend experimentation, but in seeing what works best for you, because it is not a one-size-fits-all approach like we mentioned. Now,
Yeah, we
yeah,
promised the Q&A. So
yeah.
yeah, we're open for your questions. Again, just at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a Q&A icon that you can click on and enter any questions that you have for us.
Awesome. So we have a couple questions that I'm seeing come in. The first one is, how can I incorporate this when eating out or traveling?
Oh, okay. Good question. So when you're eating out at a restaurant, now nutrition information or the menu is everywhere. You can find it online. And so you can almost kind of plan how your meals will be. Or if you go to the restaurant, I always recommend, starting with not the bread basket or the chips, but starting with a salad or a vegetable appetizer, or ordering, something that includes vegetables, includes a good protein, and then having a smaller serving size of, the rice or the grains, and setting up your plate using that plate method. Sometimes it can be easy if we go and get pasta and you have a huge plate of pasta with maybe, some protein on top, but we want to make sure that we are getting some vegetables in there. So don't be afraid to ask at the restaurant, can I have, what's your vegetable of the day? Can I have an extra serving size of that? And then you can include that with your meal. And also when traveling, this is another great question too, because this is something that a lot of our members, they're traveling quite often and they're not sure what to order. So again, if you're ordering out at a restaurant or you're at the airport, look for, it doesn't have to be a complete meal, but almost piecing these things together. So what I've seen in the airport is even, proteins on the go, like hard-boiled eggs, or, all the nuts that they have in the stores at the airport, or you can bring your own. So you can kind of maybe pair that with a piece of fruit. so you can kind of piece things together, but try to balance your meal with some protein, some healthy fats, and some carbohydrates.
This is such a great question because I suffer from this all or nothing thinking when it comes to things like the balanced plate and the Signos plate. I think what everyone should endeavor to do is try to incorporate this in your life as much as you can. Now we understand life happens, right?
Yeah.
You're going to go to that meal where there's nothing but carbs on the table. It happens. Just keep striving to get more and more of these balanced plates. And I think what you're going to recognize as you do is your glucose numbers are better, first of all. But second of all, you're just going to feel better. So it may not be an all or nothing thing. Don't think you have to do this all the time. Just try and incorporate it more and more in your life.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point because we don't want our members to worry about having the occasional spike. It happens. It happens to all of us. It's really looking at those repetitive spikes. Those are the things that we want to really address and see if we can, okay, let's look at our plate and let's see maybe what I'm missing, or maybe what can I add to it, or maybe how can I change the portion size on a few things. But spikes are going to happen and that's okay. But we want to, make those choices and just use the plate method as a guide. It's just such an easy guide that you can use really wherever you're eating.
Awesome. Okay, we have so many great questions. Oh, here's one. Okay, what are some easy ways to get veggies in if it has to be half of my plate?
Another good question. And this is something that our members, they start to notice when they begin Signos that, okay, maybe I'm not eating enough vegetables. I certainly noticed that myself. So we want to make this as easy as possible. You can choose, what I like to get is like a ton of frozen vegetables, and I will even just take those frozen vegetables and roast them or throw them in the air fryer with a little bit of olive oil, just to make sure I have enough vegetables on my plate. There are other great options where, you can have different salads or already prepared salads. Or, I even recommend getting like a veggie tray and keeping that in your fridge and like using just like kind of nibbling off that throughout the week. So wherever you can get those vegetables in, try to get them in. We mentioned like a few breakfast options, like a smoothie, a veggie frittata. Those are some easy ways to get additional vegetables in.
Great. Okay. And here's another one. So I know you kind of talked a little about vegetarian, vegan. Would seitan or like those other wheat proteins that are homemade count as protein for vegetarians?
Yeah, it could. I definitely recommend, especially like if something is homemade, that would be a great option. When we're looking at the stores, and sometimes that we have seen with like some of the vegan or vegetarian foods, protein items, it can be really processed. So we're looking for like the least processed soy proteins as possible. So just again, I always pretend, and Bill mentioned this too, ignore the beautiful green farms with the red barn on top of the food package and just flip it over and read the ingredients list.
Yeah, and if I could just add, as the vegan spokesperson on the webinar, that there are some great vegan sources. You mentioned protein powders, but seitan is one of them. The other is tempeh, and I just learned this the other day, that an average serving of soy is about 16 grams of protein. If you have tempeh, it's about 21 grams for the same size. So you're getting more protein there, and it's usually not processed, and it's the precursor to tofu. It actually existed before people started eating tofu. So it's kind of like a food that goes way back in time. It's a fermented form of soy, which also gives you some fermented food, which is a good thing.
Yep, that's definitely something we want to include in our diet. So
Yeah.
Good question.
Well, okay. And does the order of eating the elements in a meal matter?
Yes, they do. This is a fabulous question, and we are actually going to do an entire Body Signals live webinar on this question. But for a short answer, yes, it does. And what we typically recommend is starting off with those vegetables, which is why I recommend like a veggie appetizer if you're going out, or starting with the vegetables on your plate, and then having protein, healthy fats, and your carbohydrates last.
Perfect. Okay, here's another great one. Would love to see your interpretation of the plate method for a keto diet.
Yeah, so if you're on a keto diet, you still want to keep majority of your plate being those colorful, non-starchy vegetables, incorporating maybe it's not a fourth of your plate of protein, but maybe it's a little bit more. And then you can experiment with a little bit more of those healthy fats. So maybe you're doing, adding like half an avocado and then cooking in oil. So the healthy fats is really where you're going to make up for the lower amount of carbs.
And I'd add to that is you can use Signos as a way to go to modified keto. So you can start experimenting with some of those vegetables to see if some of them don't impact your glucose. And if they don't, you might want to consider adding those to your diet and still being relatively on a keto diet.
Yes, I love that answer because even when I started wearing the CGM and using Signos like almost 3 years ago now, I was starting off like, limiting my carbohydrates and, I think I was a little bit more insulin resistant. And then after really focusing on stabilizing my glucose, I started experimenting with adding more carbohydrates in. And as I improved my insulin sensitivity, I was actually able to tolerate them a lot better. And so I was able to incorporate more beans, more potatoes. And so, yes, use Signos to experiment because we don't want to be restricting when we don't have to. And you're really going to see what is working best for your body.
Okay. And here's one. What would make glucose remain elevated all night long? Sometimes it goes up and down, sometimes it stays high and out of range.
This is another good question. So there are several things that can impact our overnight readings. The first thing is, okay, what are we eating for dinner and how close is it to bedtime? That can impact the late night readings. If you had alcohol with it, that can delay the glucose spikes. So you may see, your glucose spiking later overnight. Other things can include, like if it's a higher fat and higher carbohydrate meal, you may see these spikes go up and down. Other things that are not food related can be stress. So your stress response can most certainly impact overnight readings. Your sleep habits, poor sleep or not enough sleep can certainly impact your overnight readings. So what I recommend is first, let's start with dinner. Let's start with the plate method. Let's give our bodies some time to digest the food so we're not eating right before bedtime. So maybe we push our dinner up at least a few hours before bed. And then log in the Signos app, use the notes section and write everything down. So that way you can go back and see, okay, what was working, what did not work. Maybe you had your meal earlier, then you incorporated some stress management techniques, you're winding down before bed, and then you're getting to bed at a good hour, and then that can help. So I always recommend taking notes to kind of see, to help you see what's working, what's not working.
I would add to that, Alyssa, that another thing that might cause that rise is the dawn phenomenon, which for some people can happen as early as 3 in the morning. And that's just a natural response that our physiological response, our body trying to get us ready to get up in the morning. And there's nothing wrong with seeing that rise. I also was just talking to a research scientist who's been looking at glucose data of large populations. And she shared with me an interesting thing that she's seen that when people restrict carbohydrates, sometimes in the early days, they see a rise of their average glucose. And while it's not really been studied yet, her hypothesis was without all of that exogenous carbohydrates, without us eating a lot of carbohydrates, our body is compensating in the short term by increasing the circulating glucose. So you might, if you're new to Signos, you might see a little bit of a rise, maybe the first couple of days or even a couple of weeks in your glucose, and that might happen overnight. And it's just it's something that happens when you start restricting some of the carbs that you were eating before.
Great. Okay, here's another one. What are your thoughts on seed oils?
Yes, so this is a good question too. So when it comes to seed oils and when it comes to just like our standard American diet, we want to make sure that we're getting a lot of these omega-3 anti-inflammatory foods and making sure that we are not getting too many of the omega-6 pro-inflammatory foods, which can be found in seed oils. So we just want to make sure that that ratio is pretty even. And so a lot of the times these seed oils can be in a lot of the processed foods. So we really want to make sure that we're, again, going back to our philosophy and focusing more on the whole foods, the nutrient dense foods, cooking with your own oils versus, focusing on a lot of the processed and packaged foods, which contain a lot of these. And it just sends the ratio off to more of an inflammatory state.
I'm so glad someone asked this question because there have been a lot of social media influencers saying avoid seed oils at all cost, putting them there on the list of like the top 5 things to avoid in foods. And as Alyssa mentioned, it's probably more of a balance thing. It's balancing those 6s with 3s. 6 are in the omega-6 in the seed oils, and 3s you can get from those other healthy fat choices. There's not a lot of evidence as to how harmful it is to get seed oils, but I think Alyssa makes a great point that they usually are hidden in processed foods. But what might really be happening is you should be avoiding as much processed foods as possible. But don't go crazy with seed oils either, because we don't know if there is a detrimental effect to them.
And naturally cutting out more of the processed foods is going to limit the amount of these like omega-6. It's just going to reduce that inflammation. And again, focus on the healthy fats that we mentioned.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So we have time for like 1 or 2 more questions. Here's a wonderful one. What is defined as a spike?
That's a good question. So we typically say, again, like looking at all the data and what we mentioned earlier is we don't want to see a very high post-meal glucose rise. So, we recommend looking for a rise like 30 milligrams per deciliter or less after your meals.
Great. Okay. And last question. Okay, can you give examples of veggie or fruit smoothies that don't spike glucose so much?
Yes. Okay. Let's see. There's a few components that I always recommend incorporating in a veggie or fruit smoothie. Again, sometimes I'm glad that you're mentioning smoothie where it's blended and you're keeping the fiber in there. So if we want to start with protein and thinking about the plate method and making sure we have all 3 macronutrients so it's balanced, you can do a protein powder, you can do Greek yogurt, like that can be another option in your smoothie. And then adding that healthy fat. So maybe it's an avocado to make it really creamy, or flax seeds, chia seeds, a tablespoon or 2 of a nut butter. That can, be your serving of healthy fats. And then your carbohydrates, get some veggies in there, a handful of spinach or frozen cauliflower rice, frozen zucchini. Those you really don't taste. And so that can be your serving of veggies. And then the fruits too. So like you can choose, I always buy the frozen berry mix and, choose the low glycemic berries to add in, or you can add in, half a banana in there or whatever is your personal preference, but making sure alongside those fruits and veggies that you have those healthy fats and the protein.
Yeah, those are all great suggestions. I would add to that, maybe think about a resistant starch is another great thing. So like a green banana powder, which we experimented with the staff at Signos. Some people liked it. Some people thought it tasted like feet, I think was the response. But there's one thing that you should do, and we're going to have a whole webinar just on this topic for Body Signal Lives, is experiment with different smoothie mixtures to find that combination of fruit and proteins and fat that is going to be gentle on your glucose. So definitely experiment.
Okay, we actually have 1 more question. I know I said that was the last one, but this one just came up and it's great. So I wanted to address it. It says, I was diagnosed with insulin resistance. Do you have any suggestions for what my plate should look like?
Yeah, and this is where, again, it goes back into using this plate as your framework for your meals. So at least getting half your, I would really follow this plate method and then look and see within Signos how your glucose is responding. And the great thing about this plate method is you're getting half your plate vegetables, you're getting protein, you're getting healthy fats. That's all going to help provide real foods and help stabilize your glucose. But you can experiment and you have the option to swap things in and out. Like one night you may want fish, the next night you may want chicken. So you just change out the protein and the veggies and the healthy fats and the carbohydrates to whatever you personally like. And then you start seeing how your glucose responds. If you're more insulin resistant and you're seeing very large spikes, then let's go back and see, okay, did we have enough fiber? Was our carbohydrate maybe the portion size too much? Did I kind of experiment with the meal order? Did I have enough protein? Did I have enough healthy fats? So you really can go back and start to experiment and, kind of manipulating the portion sizes. But starting with this plate method as a baseline for insulin resistance is a really good place to start.
Oh, Alyssa, those are some great questions that we got from everyone. So this is almost a wrap. If you want to see when the next Body Signal Lives are going to be, there's a URL on your screen, signos.com/Body Signals Live. We'll have the schedule of the future webinars that we're going to do. Do us a favor as you exit, there's going to be a survey that pops up. We would love to know what you feel about this content, if it's helpful for you and how we can make it better. And then if you'd like to listen to this again, we're going to be posting this on Body Signals, the podcast, which you can listen to on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcast, or any major platform that has a podcast. And it's Body Signals is the name of our podcast. So thanks, Alyssa. It was a pleasure. Such great content. And thank you, everybody, for attending our first Body Signals Live.